a quorum. I don't have, oh, there's Joe. Hi. All right.
8.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Emergency Ordinance Number 20-A14, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. The committee members who are electronically present at this meeting are me, Ali Pesh, Brian Day, Valerie Long, Doug Bates, Joe Fort, Josh Rector, Costas Albertus, Sandy Hausman, and I think that's it for now. Might have a couple latecomers. And county staff in attendance for this meeting are Carolyn Schaefer, Rachel Falkenstein, Kevin McDermott, and Tori Canelopoulos.
There you go.
I feel like I get Costas's name wrong every time too. Sorry. Can you say
Tori's
it for me?
in very good company. Yeah.
Can you say it for me one time, Costas?
Costas fine. It's good. I mean,
Just
Albertus.
Albertus.
Albertus. It's the Bertus Bertus.
Costas is fine.
That's the part I always question myself. And now we have Tom Loach and Mike Kunkel. So great. Thanks everybody for coming. It's been a very short while since we've seen you, each other. So I appreciate the time. Tonight, oh, I have some more stuff to read. The persons responsible for receiving public comment are the Crozet Community Advisory Committee. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in this electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County calendar and on the Crozet Master Plan update page at publicinput.com/imaginecrozet. During the Q&A portion of this meeting, we invite you to share your comments or questions by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your toolbar. This applies to attendees, and panelists are also welcome to raise your hand with the button or physically, although sometimes I can't see everyone's faces. So if I don't call on you, give me a nudge. And if you are, oh, and if you want to speak, you can also do that by raising your hand, and the facilitator, Carolyn, can unmute you so that you can talk. If you are joining by phone, press 9 to raise your hand and be placed in the queue. Verbal questions and comments are the preferred method of participation. Alternatively, you can send a question through the chat box and staff will respond via the chat or read the question or comment aloud. All comments will be included in the public record and reviewed by staff. That's the Q&A and the chat. But it's helpful if people just use the chat, in my opinion. All right. I think that's it for the legalese. Did everybody get a chance to look over the minutes that Joe sent out? And if you have any corrections, let me know. I don't hear anything, so
approval.
Got a motion to approve. Anybody want to second that?
Second.
Thank you. All right, we can all unmute, and everyone who approves the minutes can say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. So tonight we are going to hear from Kevin McDermott about transportation, along with his fellow staff members. And I think I can hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Allie. Kevin, can you go ahead and share your screen? I just have the first 2 slides, and then Kevin's going to do the majority of the presenting tonight. So if you can go ahead and advance, Kevin. I thought I'd kick us off by first just sharing what what tonight's presentation will cover. I'm going to just give a quick refresher on some of the transportation topics we've covered so far, since it's been a while since we've talked about some of these topics. And then Kevin will give an overview of the transportation analysis we did. And then we have 2 main kind of topics for to share some information with you and then have some opportunity for discussion and feedback. The first is focus on downtown and traffic analysis and future alternatives there. And then a look at the Route 250 intersection. And then we'll save some time at the end for other areas that may want to bring up that aren't covered in those 2 portions of Crozet. If there are other concerns or topics you want to share, we'll have some time at the end for that. So Kevin, if you can take the next slide. So just wanted to kind of refresh where we've gone so far with the transportation topic. We've had quite a bit of discussion early on about just some high level topics relating to transportation. In our early workshops, we talked a little bit about connectivity and the importance of, we heard from the community the importance of connectivity and connecting our, especially our centers and commercial centers. And then we heard early on that 2 of the big issues for the community as far as traffic were downtown and then 250 near Old Trail and the schools. Interestingly, our traffic analysis found similar issues. So that's where we're going to focus our discussion tonight. And then if you recall, we had a virtual workshop in the summer focused on bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. That was our our highest number of participants since we've been online on that workshop. So there's a lot of interest in these topics, and we're going to continue to carry these forward in our connectivity conversation, even though tonight is focused mostly on automobile. And then again, in that discussion, we again heard the importance of downtown Crozet for those types of improvements. And then lastly, we did also a roadways and transit virtual workshop, and we heard again the importance of Route 250 and downtown as fixing the congestion issue. So that's what we also found in our study that Kevin's going to go ahead and share what we found and what some of the possible solutions would be for that. So Kevin, I will kick it over to you for you to share.
All right, well, Kevin McDermott, I'm Chief of Planning here, focused on transportation, and I've been working on this study with Rachel and Tori and others in the planning division for a number of months now. So I'll go through some background, and then as Rachel said, we'll get into some of the details of the findings and alternatives that we're looking at that I'd love to get your all's feedback on as we move through this. First of all, I just wanted to kind of recap some of the projects that have been going on from the previous master plan. As we look at that implementation chapter of the previous Crozet master plan, a lot of those projects have moved forward. A lot of them have been completed already. So things like the Jarman's Gap improvements, the Crozet streetscape, we've got transit out there now. So if you look through that, there's a lot of things that have happened, and we've got a lot of things that are kind of going on right now. And I was just going to highlight a few of those. As you can see in the slide, these are sort of ongoing projects that we're working on right now. And I just wanted to give you a quick update. So the first one there is down at the 250-64 interchange. We have worked with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission to submit a grant application in the current round of Smart Scale through the state to place a park and ride down there that could be serviced by transit and also could be utilized as a park and ride for private vehicles. So that is being evaluated, and we'll know in the spring how that did. We're also VDOT is currently working on the intersection of Route 250 and Route 240 over there by the trestle. That's B right here. That was awarded funding through a highway safety improvement program a number of years back. and it is almost complete with the design. They expect that to go out to bid in the next few months and will be under construction in 2021, hoping to get that finished by the end of the year of 2021. C here is the Crozet Square reconstruction. As you all remember, that was the NIFI project that was chosen through that NIFI process a number of years back. It involves redoing the square from Crozet Avenue over to Oak Street, and then also redoing Oak Street. That was fully funded. It's currently in design right now, and we are hoping that that could get under construction late next year. The next project is Barnes Lumber redevelopment, the Library Avenue and Park Ridge Road extensions. You can see that's D. That's two different projects actually going on. You all have been really involved in the Barnes Lumber redevelopment. I think you all know about what's going on there with the connection to the square, Crozet Avenue, Oak Street, High Street, and that downtown development over towards Hilltop. And there's also another private development that is extending that road from Hilltop over to Eastern Avenue. So right through there. Those are both those projects being privately led through developers. I don't know the exact timeline on both of those. Barnes Lumber, I think we're expecting to get that under construction next year as well. We have been coordinating with the developer on that one quite a bit. But that's another major project that's going to be coming shortly that we've got funding for. Another project ongoing is the Eastern Avenue South extension. This is from West Hall down through Corey Farms to US 250. Currently, that project is being designed. The county put forward an amount of money to go towards the design of it, but we do not have construction funding yet. So once we get a little bit further along in the design of that, we plan to seek funding through the state in another application process in the next year to try and get construction money on that. And then the last project I just want to bring up was the US 250 West sidewalk. This is down there in front of the Harris Teeter from Corey Farms, going to the east from there. And it's a sidewalk on one side of the street, a pedestrian crossing with a pedestrian refuge island in the middle, connecting to a sidewalk on the south side so that people from the north side can get along there and down to that shopping center on the south side. That project is in the bid process right now. So design is essentially complete and we're trying to get the construction going on it. It's fully funded. So that was just a quick update on some of the projects that are ongoing. Now to get into this study that we've been working on for the past, about the past 6 months now. So this study was actually funded partially through the Barnes Lumber project. During their rezoning, they offered a proffer to provide some funding to allow the county to evaluate how that development would impact some of the transportation operations in the downtown area. So we took that money, and actually what we realized that because it was coming along at the same time as this master plan update, we thought it would be a better idea to just expand that to the entire Crozet development area and look out into the future, 25 years into the future, so that we could get a better idea as to how we expected how things would develop in Crozet overall. And that way it also helps us evaluate how improvements in one area may affect transportation operations in another. So we took the money from the proffer, we added some county funding through our CIP and have started this study. We hired a private consultant, their local consultant, EPR is their name, to do this study for us. And they are looking out to 25 years, as I said, for the future of 2045 to see what development would look like at that time and how we could expect traffic operations to look. They did that by using modeling the intersection operations using a traffic modeling software, estimating trip generation by uses, and coming up with this picture of what 2045 would look at. So that's a little bit about the background. And because I know there's going to be a lot of talk about some things that you may not have a full understanding of related to traffic analysis and operations analysis. So I was just going to give you a quick overview on how that worked. So first of all, we needed to develop the current traffic volumes at these intersections that we were looking at. And we looked at, I think, 11 intersections. Sorry, it was on this 12 intersections throughout all of Crozet. Those are those things highlighted, most of them right along Crozet, but going to the next one. So we needed to develop the current traffic volumes at all of those intersections. At this time, because of the pandemic being ongoing, we couldn't just go out and count those traffic volumes, which is what we would normally do in this case. But because the volumes are down related to the pandemic, we needed to come up with our own estimates for that. Most of these intersections have been evaluated in the recent past. So we were able to take that data that had been collected over the past couple years for these intersections, and we applied a growth factor to them to come up with what we thought the current values were. We used that we checked that growth value by looking at changes in other intersections over years and trying to come up with a reasonable number. If it didn't, then we looked at the estimates of volumes along the corridor, and we're able to come up with a general number as to what we thought was occurring at any one intersection. And we look at those during the peak hour. So we want to know what's happening during the morning peak and what's happening in the afternoon peak. If it works at those times, it works the rest of the day because you don't have any other peak hours. So those are what we were trying to develop those numbers for. Regarding the modeling analysis, so we use a Synchro is a modeling software that you can use to generate operations at intersections. And what that does, this is just an example of the kind of thing that we look at when we get those results. So for example, this is Jarman's Gap Road, Old Trail Drive. You can see each of the approaches is listed. All of the movements from those approaches. So Jarman's Gap Road, eastbound right, Jarman's Gap Road, eastbound left and through. Those two movements are in one lane. So you see all the movements for each one of the intersection legs. And then we put the storage, which shows you how much room is in any one turn lane. So there's a 30-foot turn lane for that eastbound right movement. There is an effective storage length, which shows you if there's additional space that people could utilize for that. So that's what that is right there. And then what the modeling analysis gives us is level of service, delay, and queue for each one of those intersections. The level of service is A through F grade, and it's based entirely on the delay. So if you have to wait under 10 seconds at an intersection during peak hour, they'll give that an A. It's a sort of arbitrary number that they assign to it. If you end up having to wait about a minute at any one intersection, that would be a failing grade. So that's where level of service comes from. It's related specifically to the delay, which is the number of seconds you have to wait there. And the last thing is the queue. So the queue is the number of feet behind the intersection that you're waiting in. You can see here, Jarman's Gap Road, this is all for current traffic levels in the existing AM, existing PM, all operating really well. A's and B's, you can see no movement has to wait more than 13.5 seconds on average in the peak hour, and the queues are fairly short. And in all cases, within the amount of room you have for storage. So this is this is an intersection that is currently operating very well. So I just wanted to give you that kind of brief overview of how this works. Then getting into the future traffic volumes. So this was something more difficult that we needed to look at to identify what we thought traffic volumes would be in 2045. First, we took those existing conditions volumes that you saw in the previous slide, and then we add a growth factor to that. Just like I said, how we added growth factor to some of those older intersection analyses to come up with what we thought was the current time. We would add that growth factor every year out till 2045. And also what we did was we looked at all the development that we expected to occur within the Crozet development area over those 25 years. So the growth factor is supposed to account for outside traffic that would be coming in, and then this accounts for the new traffic generated within the area. What you see here is the information that we used was the development pipeline, which I think you all have seen. It's available on our website. So we looked at all the approved developments in there. We looked at what that was going to be developed as, and we used the ITE standards, which is the traffic engineering standard for trip generations. And we used that to come up with the number of trips we thought any one use would put onto the road. We also used all the build out parcels or that capacity analysis information. So if we thought there were parcels that did not have any development approved on them, then we would assign a number to those, assuming they would get built in the next 25 years. And that was really a best guess as to what we thought would be developed. And we based that on the previous land use plan and also what we thought it was looking like this new land use plan would look like. So those are those orange parcels that you see in this screen. So that's how we came up with the future traffic volumes. And we also had to assign those to different roadway networks. So imagine if Eastern Avenue is opened in the next few years, we know that traffic is going to be pulled from Crozet Avenue over to Eastern Avenue. And we had to come up with a percentage for what we thought that would be. So that was another step in this, is to reassign that traffic based on the known transportation improvements that we would see in the next 25 years. So now I'm going to get into the analysis of some of these specific areas. Like I said, we looked at 12 intersections all around Crozet, but we really focus on two main areas, the downtown Crozet area and the US 250 area, because those are the areas that we saw would likely have the worst traffic operations in 2045. So those are the ones we needed to focus on. So the first one is this intersections 4 through 8. That's it, 3 Notched, the Square, Library Avenue, Jarman's Gap, and Tabor Avenue. This is existing conditions. Right now, none of that is failing. None of those intersections are failing, but some of the queues are extending into the adjacent intersections. So people waiting to make a left turn onto Jarman's Gap from Crozet are blocking Tabor Street, and a lot of times in the peak hours. So that's the kind of thing that we see happening, but it's not too bad right now. However, this is the existing conditions. So you can see, I know you can't read these numbers, but the point being that green is a level of service A or B, yellow is C or D. So you can see that we've got a good level of service and existing conditions right now at all of these intersections. This is the queue length. So you can see the gray ones are showing you the ones where the queue is extending further than the storage space. So like I mentioned at Jarman's Gap, that left turn to go into Jarman's Gap is causing that queue right there to back up to 113 feet, blocking Tabor Street. That's what that gray line right there shows you. That's existing conditions. Now in the future, this is where it gets a little bit bad. So we do start seeing that the queues in a lot of these intersections are now extending beyond the storage areas in 2045. That's no surprise. You know, we're going to see a lot of development down there in the next 25 years. So we can imagine there's going to be a lot more trips. You can see all the red from the level of service movements, the reds that are failing. 6 is there at Library Avenue, coming out of the church, trying to make a left onto Crozet, trying to make a left from Jarman's Gap onto Crozet Avenue, and coming southbound and northbound at 3 Notched and Crozet Avenue. Those are both extensive queues. There's also an extensive queue there, but those are all level of service F in 2045. The worst ones are the westbound approach at 3 Notch, like I just said, the northbound approach at Tabor. That's this, it backs up all the way through there. And the westbound Library Avenue. So once Barnes Lumber develops, we expect that Library Avenue, because it's so hard to make lefts on there, that's going to back up and really lock up almost all the intersections in this area. So we need to try and figure out a way to solve that issue. So what we did was we worked with the consultant to come up with some options that we may want to look at that we thought could solve the problems. As I get into these, I'll say that you see there is a disclaimer. We put pictures of the road, what these roadway network improvements would look like on aerials so that you all could conceptualize them. They're not going to look like what you see here, and it may not look that different on this one, but you will see some that maybe will look a little shocking to you. So I just want to warn you that that's not exactly what it's going to look like. It's just to give you all an idea as to how that could operate. So keep that in mind. So this is the first thing that we looked at to address those downtown Crozet problems, their connectivity improvements. And the two areas we focused that on were the potential Dunvegan Lane connection. I think you all know that Dunvegan Lane connects to Park down there on the south side, but it doesn't go through all the way to Crozet Avenue. There is some right-of-way there, there's a driveway, but it doesn't connect as a public road. What we looked at was that if we were to connect that as a public road, that would relieve a lot of the issues going on at Tabor and keep a lot of those vehicles off. And the problem with Tabor is that Tabor and Jarman's interact. Unfortunately, they're so close together. They're not the recommended distance apart. So problems at one intersection, that, like I mentioned, that left turn to get onto Jarman's, that queue backs up the people coming from Tabor, and then Tabor backs up. So that's where we think that something like a Dunvegan connection might help out. A second thing we looked at for connectivity would be to improve High Street going up into Barnes Lumber. This roundabout is actually being constructed by Barnes Lumber. And of course, this is High Street will go on up and connect to the rest of the roadway network. And this goes over to Library Avenue. So this intersection is being constructed already with connections. But right now, High Street is a barely 2-lane rural road. So what we thought was if we could improve that to make it accessible for two-way traffic and pedestrian activity, also pedestrian bikes, then that would relieve a lot more of that traffic that would have been going down Jarman's and blocking up these intersections. And instead it would have been sending them to a more major intersection that we could control. So these two connectivity improvements did show that there would be a lot of reduction in the congestion, but they weren't enough. So what we are considering is that these are two projects that could be done in coordination, in tandem with other ones that we're going to get into a little bit more. I also do have to add that we are talking about the vehicular issues right now, but the bike ped and transit are obviously a very important component to this. We don't want to ignore that. I think that's a really important piece that we're going to have to continue to look at to help reduce traffic congestion all through the downtown area, and also to give people options. So keep that in mind. We're not ignoring that need. But other improvements that we looked at were what we call the quadrant intersection. So the problem was that even making those connections, we still have queues that back up all along Crozet Avenue, along Library Avenue, and along Jarman's Gap. We looked at things like just adding signals. We looked at just adding roundabouts. None of those solved the problem. So they ran those options through the model and found out the queues still were there, even with the signalization or with two roundabouts. So we had to get a little more creative. A quadrant intersection operates by taking the left turns off of the minor street, which is Jarman's Gap here. So with this, you would no longer be able to make a left turn from northbound Crozet onto Jarman's Gap, and you wouldn't be able to make a left turn from Jarman's Gap onto Crozet. Instead, you would have to go up, go through the roundabout, and go along the quadrant to go that way, or you could go all the way around the roundabout and come back and make a right onto Jarman's Gap. If you were coming from Jarman's and you wanted to head north, you would make your left turn back here and go up and utilize that roundabout to go up. Once again, I'll point out that this is conceptual only. We wouldn't take out this entire parking area. We would lose some parking that would have to be replaced if we move forward with an intersection with an improvement like this, but it wouldn't look exactly like this. So just keep that in mind. I know it looks big and probably a little bit shocking, especially if you're involved in that church right there. But there would be changes to this as we got into design. This is conceptual only. This does reduce those queues significantly and could work very well. It's an expensive project though, so keep that in mind. There were still some queues that would occur though. It's not a perfect solution. So we wanted to look at another option. The next one is what we call the big circle. And this is really our team thinking outside the box here. Instead of making that a quadrant with one roundabout, what they've done here is they've turned what was that quadrant essentially into one large roundabout. So there is no southbound connection on Crozet Avenue going through this segment of Crozet right here. If you wanted to head south all the way through downtown Crozet, you would go right and then left and then right. These would be two-phase signals. So two-phase signals move traffic really quickly. You don't have to wait for a lot. They would operate really well. There would be little to no queuing. It really addresses a lot of those operations. But once again, this is a big change and there would be impacts. It would be an expensive project, but it does appear to solve a lot of the issues. So that's why we're bringing it to you, and we're hoping to get some feedback from you once I move through some more of these, but I'd love to hear your all's thoughts on what we're looking at here. The other piece that we wanted to look at was 3 Notched Road and Crozet Avenue intersection on the north side of those tracks. I don't have a figure that shows what we're looking at here because we're still looking at the feasibility of some options, but we did look at things like a signal there. We looked at additional turn lanes. Both of those options really didn't address the problem. So a signal still showed really long queuing, especially going south through Crozet Avenue through the downtown, and the westbound 3 Notched approaching this intersection, still very long queues. We have very little room in this area to place new or extended turn lanes. So that makes it really hard. The one thing that does look like it would solve the problem fairly well would be a roundabout. Unfortunately, because of the grades, because of the railroad, a roundabout is a pretty expensive proposition. There would be significant property impacts to these parcels on the north side to place that. We haven't fully evaluated it. We're still going to continue to look at that. But I just want to warn you that that's one of the issues that we run into if we were to put a roundabout there. Another option that we did look at that we are still evaluating is the idea of a new railroad crossing somewhere between Crozet Avenue and the Park Ridge crossing. We currently don't have any crossings there. There have been some proposed in the past. There was one proposed in the previous master plan, but we have run into a lot of issues with moving forward with those. It's difficult terrain. Of course, the old location has some contamination issues that we would have to deal with on it. We don't know if we're going to be able to get around. So there's a lot of issues with that, but we are still looking at it. I will say that if we were able to get a a new railroad crossing somewhere to the east of this location and a roundabout, you would see, nearly perfect operations in this area, but those are expensive propositions. So it would take a long time to move forward, and we still have to look at some of the feasibility issues with those. That's really the end of the downtown section. In a minute, we'll move on to the US 250 area, but we wanted to take a break here and see if there were questions or comments that you all had. Allie, you want to call on people or?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Does anybody want to start us off? I see there was a couple questions. There were some comments in the chat. Somebody asked also about like your data as far as, how you, it asked 2020 housing units / population and 2045 housing units / population. But I'll let if you want to address that, or we can go to some.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is asking, but I'll say,
like, how did you figure out, like, what's the difference between 2020 and 2045?
yeah. So like I was saying, what we did was we used that development pipeline and assumed the development that we had already approved would be built. And with each one of those, so if it were approved for, say, a single family residence, that single family residence using the ITE manual, it would give us a number of trips that we would expect to see from that single family residence. So we did that for the entire Crozet area and came up with a number and used that for both the development pipeline, so those approved projects, and the projects that we expected to be developed in the next 25 years based on the previously approved Crozet master plan, with maybe some minor tweaks, thinking that there might be some changes to land use from this new update. So we didn't want to ignore you were reevaluating land use, but we did look at that as another factor.
Is there any indication like that any of those intersections will be failing, in 5 years versus 25 years? Like, does this study get that specific?
No, this study doesn't, but I will say that, we have a lot of improvements that are going on in downtown Crozet right now. A lot of these connectivity improvements, the Library Avenue connections. So I think that we probably in the downtown area, based on the fact that the existing conditions don't look that bad, we'll probably be able to last for a while in the downtown Crozet area. I don't think that that's the most critical need. You'll see when I get into 250, there's a little bit of a different story there. We have some existing issues down at 250 that I think maybe are a slightly higher priority, but we'll leave that to you all to address. So it didn't really look at phasing that. We will as we continue on in the master plan.
Okay. Anne has a question, and I don't know if Tori and Rachel, you can help with some of the questions in the chat. That would be helpful for me, because if I'm trying to listen to Kevin, I can't read the questions at the same time. All right, go ahead, Anne.
Thank you. So I'm just reporting what citizens have been saying to the last 5 resident engineers for the last 12 years, Carrie being number 5. And that is that for people who are not engineers, we come up with all sorts of good ideas, like having traffic lights that actually talk to each other, so that intersection 6, 7, and 8 would actually work together in the existing infrastructure. So I will just kick that ball back into the pot so that you all brainiacs can think about it some more, because VDOT rejected it out of hand. But we don't have $50 million to do this other stuff anytime in my lifetime. And I don't know, a lot of you younger people, you may, but it seems silly to wait when we know that many times during the day, there's a 20-car queue eastbound on Jarman's Gap at the stop sign. That's just a fact. And it may not show up in your traffic counts, but it's a fact. And so we just hope you will think about that. And the other thing is, we talked with the NIFI project about how the light at the square was going to move down to Library Avenue within the next year or so. So hopefully that will help some of that in the meantime. And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
I will say, well, first of all, we found out from VDOT that we're not able to fully move that light at the square through the Crozet Square project. That will remain because of sight distance issues there. So if you're coming out of Crozet Square and you want to make a right turn there, which is the only way you're no longer going to be able to make a left turn out of Crozet Square. You can only make a right. The problem being that if you turn to your left, you can't see vehicles coming because of the mud house. So there's sight distance issues. And so they required us to keep that signal only for the northbound traffic. So if someone pulls up and they want to make a right from the square on a Crozet Avenue, they'll be able to get a signal to do that without pulling out and getting hit by somebody they didn't see. So that light will remain partially. It won't stop vehicles heading southbound unless there's a pedestrian. But I will point out also that we asked the consultant to look at that coordinated signal system, and it didn't work. The problem being that you couldn't cycle it fast enough to clear the Jarman's Gap queue and the northbound queue on Crozet Avenue. It kept building up. So we asked them to look at it, and in their opinion, it wasn't enough to deal with the situation. We may want to do it if there's a short-term improvement project out there. We can look at it, but in the long term, unfortunately, that's not going to do it.
All right, I see Tom and Sandy have asked questions in the chat. Valerie and Joe have their hands up. I don't know who's first. Joe?
I think Valerie was first.
I was going to defer to Sandy because I know she got her chat in first. So you go ahead, Sandy.
I actually put all this on the chat. So I
Go
was
ahead
just,
out loud. That helps. Yeah.
yeah, I was just curious about how far High Street would extend. Where will it end up if you're going to extend it?
So High Street isn't actually an extension. High
Just improve it.
reconstructing the existing road out there. And the idea would really be to do it from Tabor up into the development, because that's where it really narrows down.
That actually needs to be done anyway. It's almost impassable now. There's a lot of traffic going in and out of there. Is it realistic to talk about Dunvegan going through? Would the county use eminent domain to do that, or how would you pull that off?
Well, obviously we always try and avoid using eminent domain or those methods. But I have a feeling if that were to move forward, it would have to be a state-led project. Like I said, there is some right of way that we have out there, or that's publicly owned through there, but it's not enough to construct the full road. So there would need to be some right of way acquired for it. It would still be an expensive project. I think there's some grade issues out there that we would have to address. But I think the value of it outweighs that. And I think it would have to be a state project that moved forward.
And when can we expect some sort of connection between the Crozet Park area and something other than Tabor? In other words, when will there be another way to get out of that part of Crozet? I mean, that'll make things easier on Tabor as well, but there's so much construction already going on and no effort that I know of to connect up with other roads.
Yeah, well, we can get out the other way at this point. If you were to go over to Eastern Avenue, new segment and take that up to Park Ridge, that can take you out. Like I said, we are in design for the southern portion of Eastern Avenue, which would also connect down to 250. So those would be major improvements, major reductions on the current traffic that's going out that way. Unfortunately, over the 25-year period, it's not enough. We still need to see improvements down there.
And what did you say was going to happen to connect up with Hilltop? What's going in there?
There is an approved development that would take, you know how Hilltop goes up and it has a T right there by the railroad and the condos. So that section of Hilltop will continue to the east into the Barnes Lumber development and connect Library Avenue in that way. And it will continue, or I'm sorry, that's to the west. It will also continue to the east through the Foothills, Glenbrook development and connect up with Park Ridge.
Yeah, that's just going to be 2 lanes, huh?
Yes, that's 2 lanes, but I will say that it is being built as a collector. There's no driveways on it, so it should be able to carry a fairly good amount of traffic out that way.
Last question. Are you assessing weekends given the number of breweries and wineries we have out here? The traffic on weekends?
We did not assess weekends. I think it would be really difficult to imagine that weekend traffic would be worse than that peak weekday traffic. I know it can be bad, but I just don't think it's quite as bad at that time. So,
anybody else want to comment on that?
So just to clarify, the projections for 2045 assume that all of those projects you just listed that are already in design, et cetera, like actually get built.
That's correct. Yes.
What about addressing the school traffic? I know it's not an issue perhaps this year, but in past years, I know along especially the 250 corridor, when schools are unloading or loading children in and out of them, it can really back up traffic significantly and more so even than the typical rush hour traffic that I'm familiar with. Have you guys studied that at all? And are there anything
that's
that you can
coming
do
up.
to really
Sorry,
address that?
This is just a pause to talk about downtown Crozet. I'm going to follow up and talk about that 250 area next.
All right.
Yep.
Apologize for the side
No.
note.
So Valerie?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. This is so helpful and really interesting to see all this information. Forgive me, did you mention at the beginning how this data would be affected with regard to the completion, hopefully someday soon, of the Eastern Connector? Will these improvements still be needed, or does this assume that the connector has been built?
It assumes that the connector, at least south to 250, is built.
Okay.
What we did was we really just used professional opinion to assign a certain percentage of the traffic that would move over to that connector.
Okay, you're right. I missed that point earlier, and I didn't realize that's what you were specifically talking about with your last question, Allie. So thank you for connecting the dots for me there.
Yeah, I think I will say we do have a lot more to talk about. I don't know if you want to take maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just focusing on downtown, but also just some basic presentation. Jenny and Joe, either of you guys have and Tom, I know.
I guess I can wait. I was just gonna help you pull some things out of the chat, but if there's not enough time, I think one of the things I saw that was interesting was kind of what Josh was asking about the school traffic. There's a question in the chat that talks about that, not specific to 250, but just in general, the end of day school traffic. And it talks about the impact on the intersection like Jarman's Gap, Old Trail. So kind of a technical question, I guess, for Kevin about how that interacts with peak hours when those aren't necessarily at the same time.
Yeah, I'll get a little bit when we get down to the next section.
Okay. And then there was this could be something staff could take on to, that if you're using your trip estimation out to 2045, it starts with the number of housing units So people want to know what that estimate is, because that should also be used to help us come up with a population range. So maybe for Rachel, that could be something we could have that.
Yeah, I saw that same question came in the Q&A, so I attempted to type out an answer. Essentially what I said is that this study is probably not the best proxy for population because they use traffic counts, not people counts. We did do the, in 2019, a growth management report that does try and give population ranges based on zoning versus comp plan. And I can share that with the group if there's interest in that. But I don't think this study is the proper.
Right. Well, it does seem like it's starting with a base of, an assumption on build out, and then, it's generating traffic instead of people from that. So it seems like we could still pull, if we're going to have whatever single family detached, and that's, we wouldn't pull traffic counts assign a number to that for people, like we've done in the past when Elaine was helping us with projections.
Right, and they're certainly related. And that 2019 growth management report did do that. It looked at the pipeline projects that have been approved and are in the pipeline, and it looked at your land use plan and zoning and projected what the population could be based on obviously assumptions. But we did that last year. So we have those numbers as recent as 2019.
Okay, maybe if you could share those again with us, that would be good.
Sure, we can put a link in the chat. I think I don't want to promise. We changed our website. I want to make sure it's still up there, but I'll when Kevin starts the next section, I'll go look at it.
Thank you. All right. I think that's enough to move on, since we'll probably, Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Two things. I put a question there. One, do you think that at least for the near future, we can get lights at Charming, Gap, and Tabor to relieve the congestion? And two, do you have a breakdown of the amount of money by project and the total amount that this will cost under your scenarios?
We do not have a cost estimate yet, but we wanted to come out here and put some of these ideas on the table to try and look at what we might move further along in this study first. So ultimately, I think we'll have planning level costs for some of the high priority projects that we identified. And those are planning level costs only. They won't be really looking at detailed right of way, utilities, that kind of stuff, but we'll get some planning level costs for it in the end. The signals, as I mentioned, and there's they have a limited lifespan out there. They would not improve very much or for very long. So I think, it's a consideration we can look at, but when you're thinking about how to spend our money, our limited resources in the county, I'm not sure if it really is going to work out well to put that money towards a light that may only make a minor improvement for a handful of years. But we can continue to look at that. All right, Allie, can I go ahead and move on so we can still have hopefully more time for questions at the end, if that's okay?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so the next area that I wanted to look at was, as we all talked about, the 250 corridor, and it's really focused on 3 intersections down there at 250. That's the Old Trail Drive 250 intersection, the intersection into the middle school and elementary school complex, and the intersection of Crozet Avenue, Miller School Road 250. So those are the 3 primary areas we're looking at. This is existing conditions. You can see already a much different picture from what we saw up in downtown Crozet. You see all these yellows and oranges, and what those are. You can even see the our key down here. Orange is level of service E, and red is level of service F. We can already see that northbound Miller School Road is a level of service F. And these are, to get to the question that someone asked about the difference between school peak and regular peak hour commuting times. Of course, in the morning time, those align. So in the AM period, those would be the same. AM is the first square you see in each one of these. So that Miller School issue is an AM issue. That is contingent on or tangent with the school traffic in the morning. In the evening, the peak hour during school release, and we've actually done we did a full study on this that we can make sure that everyone has access to. But the peak hour for when schools are released isn't quite as bad as the typical 5 o'clock peak hour. So this 5 o'clock peak hour is still worse than that time. So that's what we continue to look at. Now that does in a lot of ways extend that peak hour to really a peak 2 hours or 3 hours in some cases. So it's bad at 3 and it kind of continues kind of bad all the way through till 5:30 or something. But it's the actual peak hour is still at the evening peak hour is still closer to the 5:15 to 5:45 timeline, somewhere in there. So we did look at those issues. As you can see, currently the queues on eastbound approach at Western Albemarle High School and the western approach at the Henley and Brownsville are very long and extend beyond the storage areas. So those are queuing up into the other lanes. And as I said, many of these are already seeing a level of service ease in a lot of the movements. And Miller School, as I said, was an F already. Future conditions, it gets much worse without any additional improvements down here. You can see it right here. The red jumps right out at you. We got failing movements at essentially every one of these intersections in both the AM and PM peak hour. The queues get much worse out there. They're extending beyond the other intersections. So a major issue and the ones that were bad in current years just get much worse. So my point here is that I think this, as we look at this study, is really coming out to be a priority that we would probably want to address as soon as possible. And I'll also point out that by opening up some of these intersections, I think we would probably see some improvements in the downtown Crozet area, because some people adapt and they find the easier way out. So maybe people would stop going through downtown to get to some areas to the east of Crozet, and they'd use 250 to get there if they could easily get through some of these things. So I think there would be some benefits to that. So what we looked at with this one, and this is an interesting one because we don't have to look at different options for individual intersections. We put additional turn lanes at these intersections and it just didn't work. So there's really you don't get the bang for the buck that you would need to see if we were to add an additional turn lane through here. So really we were like, that's not going to work. Let's just go to the next step. Really what we're looking at here is that a roundabout, a 2-lane roundabout at both of these intersections would correct all those issues that we see out there. And those are 2-lane roundabouts. So they would also require 4-laning 250 through this segment. Now, the good thing about this is that this doesn't have to all be done at once. This is the type of project that we could phase. I think right now the biggest issue is probably the Old Trail Drive intersection. So we could start with that and then do another one here in future years. So it's something that we could build on over time. With all of these improvements, with the two two-lane roundabouts, they would operate at a level of service D or better, which is great for traffic. You don't really want things operating better than a level of service D during peak hour, because you wasted money on that to address like 15 minutes of a problem. The other thing is we did add turn lanes out here at Old Trail Drive. That is one area where the addition of turn lanes would have a big effect. So just those turn lanes would allow signal improvements and keep those operating really well.
That's Miller School Road is what you're looking at right there, not Old Trail
Yeah.
Drive. Is that right? Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. That's Miller School and Crozet Avenue intersection. This is Old Trail Drive in Western Albemarle. Sorry about that, Ian. Thanks for correcting. So this is really the only option that we've looked at for these. Like I said, no additions of turn lanes would really help, but we could phase this to address the major issues first and eventually get to this. So that was actually it for the 250 section. As I said, we didn't have to look at a lot of different things, but there are some serious problems out there right now. We may still, I will point out that we've had discussions about trying to add some turn lanes at that Western Albemarle Old Trail Drive. And if we can do something like that for really inexpensive, it might provide some short-term benefits out there, and we will continue to look at that. But in the long run, that what I showed there is really what's needed. So once again, I'll open it up to questions on this, and we can talk about some of the other questions you had about the other area as well.
Just real quick, it's the most recent chat question, but how can you be a little more specific? Like, since Miller School is the one that's failing already, can you explain how those roundabouts would address the Miller School problem?
The roundabouts wouldn't address the Miller School problem. The addition of a turn lane at Miller School is what we would look at there. Okay. If that were what we determined was the highest priority, then that could be what we moved on first. Adding turn lanes, if those would really open things up.
From my experience, it seems like maybe that would help with the Western and Henley intersections if we took care of that first. I mean, right?
I think it's very likely, even if it doesn't specifically help that. I mean, most people don't just go through one intersection; they go through all of them. And
right.
You got to assume like it's the accumulation of time that you have to spend going through all the intersections that really is what matters. So if we could make any improvements at this one, I think that would be a benefit to the drivers out there.
I mean, seeing as it's already failing and it seems like the smallest of the projects, it seems like that would be the first of the phases.
Yeah. And I will also say that that has been an identified priority by the county, is to address that already before going into this whole process. It was in the last list of transportation priorities, and I don't have my list with me, but it has scored high in the past. I think it was number 21 on the previous list of the entire county transportation priorities. So yeah, to your point, yes.
All right. I don't know if panelists have questions, but from the chat, is there data worth reviewing when there are issues on 64 East and West and 250 becomes the in and out of Charlottesville? And sort of a parallel question would be Tom's question about, like, have you guys looked at when they replaced that bridge? And Crozet Avenue is closed for 6 to 8 months.
That wasn't something that was considered in this study, either of those. So the bridge closing on Crozet Avenue is its own project. VDOT's leading that. It's really to address a critical issue that we know has to be addressed. We may have options for how to deal with the timing of that, but that's a separate issue that'll be looked at specifically by VDOT. And also similarly with the I-64 US 250 issues, that wasn't something that we really focused on in this study, but we have done, I think some of you may have heard in the past that we do have a US 250 corridor study that was done just a few years ago that identified a number of improvements that is available on our website, identified a number of improvements along 250 between the city of Charlottesville and the community of Crozet that'll address that. There's also some statewide plans, MPO plans that look at improvements on 64 to address some of the safety concerns to reduce, the number of times that gets closed. But those are both separate studies.
I sometimes hear this question, so I'll bring this up. The fact that there's only one entrance to Brownsville and Henley for emergencies and with increased school populations at really all three of the schools. I don't feel like this probably addresses that, but
yeah, the access, the single point of access isn't necessarily addressed. Obviously, we do find that single point of access would operate well in this alternative, but there would still, for emergencies, that wouldn't address that issue. I know there are some plans discussed about a future emergency or bike ped connection out to Old Trail, related to the Old Trail development of that parcel. So I think that's probably, if we're looking at emergency access, I think that we probably discuss that in the future when Old Trail comes in with their development of that parcel.
So what is the timeline for the Eastern Avenue, the southern end, or is that what it's called?
Yeah, the southern study, like I said, that is currently in design right now. It was an alignment study and preliminary engineering design that was going to take us to approximately a 30% design level. That study will be completed in spring of 2021, late winter, early spring of 2021. And then we are going to use the information from that to start trying to identify construction funding needed, whether that be, it's probably going to have to be a combination of local county CIP funds, and we'll go to the state for some grants through Smart Scale or revenue sharing. So I can't give a timeline on that because, like I said, we don't have construction funding, but the process is moving forward. And I think we will be releasing that the initial alignment study to the public in the next month, I believe. So you'll see the alignment study will be available. And then once that engineering study is complete, we'll make that available as well.
Okay. Sandy asked, the Miller School intersection is a priority. That was for added turn lanes, correct? Not roundabouts.
There was no specific improvement identified. It was just it was a need that was identified as a priority. So once we decided to move forward with that project, that's when we would start to really look at the details. But according to this study, it looks like turn lanes would address the problem. So we would probably base any future improvements on what comes out of this study, and turn lanes typically would be much less expensive than a roundabout. So that's the leading contender for the improvements right now, but we'll see how that turns out.
There's a few general questions that relate back to downtown. So I wanted to bring up this one that I missed before. Phil asked at Tabor and Crozet Avenue, have you considered lining up, making it a four-way stop, Tabor and Jarman's?
It was a consideration. Once again, I think when you're looking at realigning a road through a new alignment, you may be getting to the point where the expense is just too great. We talked about the need for taking property. I think that would end up taking the entire parcels across the street from there. I can't remember exactly what is across the street from that right now.
Yeah, it's a pretty historic building that Arbor Life and a couple other tenants are in.
Yeah, so aligning those is difficult. Like I said, a good option that really did make improvements was to turn Tabor into a right in, right out, and then having the Done Vegan connection or an improvement up there, so that the operations at Tabor and Crozet would not interfere with the operations at Jarman's Gap.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in, because a lot of this is so long-term. And I mean, obviously Eastern Avenue is the closest thing to being built, and it's still so far away from here, just like these short-term solutions are pretty interesting to me. And from what I hear, the community. So, Anne brought up a 3-phase light at Miller School, and I guess is like the kind of thing you're talking about, like Tom's, temporary traffic light at Tabor, things like that seem interesting. Since I mean, I've yet to, since being on this committee, really see anything actually built as many times as I've had the pleasure of your presentations. That the sidewalks at Harris Teeter, I can remember 4 years ago, it sounded like they were about to start digging, and those still aren't there. So I just I guess that's kind of my comment right now. It's just
believe me, Ali, I share your frustration. These transportation projects unfortunately take long time periods. I think most of the people on this committee did see the Crozet streetscape happen, so that's there.
That predated my
Eastern Avenue does make some connection now. It's not the full connection, but it's there. And really the Library Avenue connection, or the Library Avenue improvements, the Crozet Square improvements, those are really coming up very closely. So you'll see something if you just stick around a little bit longer, but believe me, Ali, I have frustration with the
not going anywhere. Somebody asked also a brief overview of just the timeline. I don't know. There is a lot of information on how these things go, and every project is different, but I don't know if you just could quickly address about just what we were talking about.
Well, so what we're doing right now is we're trying to get a feel from you all, from the community, as to the places where you think we should be focusing improvements that are called out in the master plan, and what some of those options are. So that's really the step that we're in right now, is getting these improvements into the master plan. We have already prioritized, like I said, the improvements, the Eastern Avenue improvements, the improvements at Crozet Avenue and 250, and there are some other more minor improvements that have been prioritized in the past. I'm trying to think, most other ones are bike ped. So once these things get into the master plan, we then prioritize them, and they then compete with the projects across the county and we try and, look at them from a reasonable sense, like trying to see what we think really should be our priorities based on safety and land use and economic development. And we rank projects based on that. The board works through that process with us. And then once that happens, we move to starting to look for funding for those projects. And so right there, we're already a couple years out probably when we're starting to look for funding for those highest priority projects. And then once funding comes through, depending on the project, it can be anywhere from 2 years to 8 years to get anything done, depending on the scale of the project and how and what type of funding we have gone after for it.
Joe, saw your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I just want to circle back to a couple of the downtown improvement things. I know that was just Kevin, you're talking about sort of getting feedback. I just think Allie's suggestion, I mean, this idea about, like, for example, table or the right in, right out, these sort of shorter term stopgaps, right? I mean, some of these might be, at least for me, I think are very attractive, especially if you couple something like the right in, right out on Tabor with the extension of High Street, and fairly soon, at least on the sort of glacial timescales we're talking about for some of the bigger projects, with things like the lumberyard redevelopment, which will be, relatively new. I think that's a positive one. Your solution or your suggestions here, this idea of going around the Methodist Church, this kind of the quadrant, I forget exactly the term for it, was one was
the quadrant and the other was the big circle, which is not a term. That was
to me, I think these are both, I mean, they're pretty elegant solutions. I think, I mean, that's a real thorny problem. And to be honest, I wouldn't have envisioned something like that, but I think that just looking at it, that's a really tricky area, and they both seem like about as good as anything else I can imagine. So I mean, but obviously those are longer, you said, those are expensive projects. So I kind of echo Allie's point about looking for some shorter term stopgaps, especially that high. And the last thing I'll just say is I was really glad to hear you to talk about the prioritization and really focusing on the other railroad crossing. So I think that's going to be a huge relief. And especially, I know a lot of us, and if you're on things like Nextdoor and stuff, we hear a lot of stuff about Park Ridge, and people just complaining about all the traffic that's now being dumped onto there as basically the only way, the only eastern outlet, especially with the opening of that new Eastern Ave connector. There's a lot of people that are not thrilled about all the traffic being dumped on Park Ridge as the only outlet to 240. So,
yeah.
Anybody else, or I can keep trying to bring up ones from the chat. There's a question about this. I guess we could look a little more closely. I mean, Kevin, are you looking at specific feedback, like which we like as far as the quadrant or the big circle?
Yeah, I would love to hear people's thoughts on that. If either or of those are possible, if there's one more than the other that people tend to like.
There was one concern in the chat as about how this impacts pedestrian safety. Something like I'm going back to Lisa.
Yeah, obviously pedestrian safety is going to be a concern with any of these things. You can see in like the big circle, which I have up here, they do show the pedestrian crosswalks. One good thing about this is it looks like it shortens up some of these pedestrian walkways so that you have a refuge in the middle. Like these, if you only have to look at traffic coming from one direction, that tends to be a safety benefit right there. You don't have to see things, be aware of things going both. Roundabouts, we've found they have a really great safety record for pedestrians. So something like the roundabout that was proposed with the quadrant, that would typically give us a lot of safety benefit for pedestrians. But a consideration with every project that we look at.
I mean, me personally, I prefer the big circle to the quadrant. I just think the roundabout really kind of destroys the main street look of like the, you know, like the small downtown, and now it's got a big circle cut out of the middle of it. I like how the other one kind of preserves that straightaway, you know, and like the tight downtown. I kind of like that the street gets narrower with the big circle. You know, when I picture like the parades going through there, it just the roundabout kind of, I don't love it. You know, maybe I'm being a little stuck, but the big circle intrigues me a little more as far as a solution. And it looks like it actually looks pretty walkable to me. Like I like how it's got a lot more green, you know, like those whatever those traffic buffers are. I could imagine, I know this is conceptual. I could imagine it actually being a pretty cute streetscape, potentially. Let me see. Anne says, is there any detail how far west the big circle? Oh yeah. So like, is that connecting to Carter Street?
Yes, that's at Carter Street.
And yeah, that it would preserve that that little yellow, the old women's club building that was the antique shop.
Yeah, we could work around those things in design with any of these.
All right, if anybody wants to raise their hand and actually voice their comments, that might be more effective.
I will also say, so this is one step in the process, just so I can keep answering questions, but I just want to make sure that I get the closing statement in here that we are still moving through this transportation study. Some of this feedback and then continued analysis will be going on over the next month. There will be a report that'll be available that'll talk about all this. It'll have all the details of the traffic analysis that we did and some of these options. So that can become part of the master plan as an appendix in the future, just so you all know. That's the next step.
Can you talk briefly about the safety of roundabouts? Some people find them scary / confusing.
Yeah, well, the records show that we see much lower levels of crashes at roundabouts versus other stop controlled intersections. So the safety has been demonstrated through studies. They can be built well and they can be built poorly also. So you just got to be careful with that. I think they force people to slow down as they approach it. And so really, I think that's a big safety benefit for it. Whereas if you have a signal, people ignore signals sometimes. People ignore stop signs sometimes, and that's when you end up with problems. You can't ignore a roundabout. The way they're built, they typically make that impossible to do. So generally we see that there's a pretty big safety benefit to these, and you're about to get a couple more along with the library, with the Barnes Lumber development. So there's 2 in there that'll allow you all to get familiar with them before we put them in on Crozet Avenue, possibly.
Tim Tolson disagrees with me, I think, and seems to like the roundabout better than the big circle. I'm paraphrasing Tim. He doesn't think that the big circle better preserves the small town feel. The roadway looks like it gets bigger in both, and a traffic light is added at Jarman's Gap in the big circle. For just to kind of talk to Tim, even though I'm the only one talking, when I picture myself walking, I find traffic lights helpful, because then like there would be a walk signal for pedestrians, and walking, like even in, Old Trail where there's the traffic circle, like traffic never stops. So it's actually, in my opinion, like you have to wait for someone. Obviously, they're supposed to give pedestrians right away, but it's not as easy as when you get the red light little walk signal. Valerie also was talking about that. Would the roundabout downtown be similar in scale to the roundabouts in Old Trail, or would it be bigger? Or
yeah, I think the one in Old Trail would be similar. The ones that are getting built in Barnes Lumber are smaller ones, but because of the volume of traffic on Crozet Avenue, I think we probably need something approximately the size of what we see in Old Trail. The bigger they are, the more cars they can process.
anybody else? Does the transportation study include methods to improve alternative connections to downtown, helping lessen car traffic, adding more bike lane sidewalks, East Jarman's Gap into downtown, 240 into downtown, Laurel Hills into downtown? I'm just reading this question.
So yeah, this study won't really address that, except to acknowledge that if we were to factor in, which is what we do a lot of times when we do these types of studies, is we come up with a percentage that we think of trips that would be made by other methods besides just a car. That was not figured into this, but if we were to continue to improve the bike ped network, we would start to think that way, that would reduce the number of trips made by vehicles going into the downtown. So it's something that we could factor into this study, but really those recommendations are going to be made throughout the master plan anyway, is another piece of that. So there's no way we would want to move forward with this without also looking at bike ped improvements and transit improvements.
Is there any, do you have an estimate as far as those two downtown, the Circle, the Quadrant, which one is more expensive?
I think that the roundabout would likely be more expensive. I think that probably takes more additional right of way than the big circle, because the big circle reduces the width because you're only doing one way travel on that section through Crozet Avenue.
Yeah.
I would have a feeling that it would probably be the big circle, but we'll try and get some more detail on that as we move through the process.
Joe, did you still have a comment?
Yeah, I just, my preference is probably for the Quadrant. I'm not as bothered by the roundabout, especially since, actually, Kevin, could you jump back to the big circle? Yeah, because Allie's concerned, you're concerned about walkability there, Allie. I mean, and the sort of Allie's comment about, the safety, relative safety or comparative safe feeling of traffic lights, helping and assisting in crossing. I guess is not, I don't think that that's going to be as big of an issue given where the traffic lights are, right? They're down on Jarman's Gap. And it really seems to me like most people are going to be crossing up near Library. And I guess if your concern is the roundabouts are tricky to navigate with pedestrian crossing, that's one thing. But I guess especially like, for example, going across Library or wherever, I guess I don't see a huge benefit to the lights. But, I think, sorry, Allie.
It's not just safety, I guess. It's more just like friendliness. Like I'm sure that they're both safe and, but it's more just like, you making the walker feel like they're not inconvenienced by the traffic.
Yeah, I guess I don't sort of personally feel that way. I feel like, and I'm glad Valerie asked the question, or the scale in Old Trail does seem relatively sort of friendly. But I guess I think most people here, I mean, we have kind of feelings one way or the other, but I mean, it seems like cost might be one of the overriding concerns. So I think we'd be curious to see, as Kevin, as you guys go forward and kind of think about relative costs.
Okay.
People may be a little indifferent between the options.
Yeah, I think, and we will continue to look at both of these options. I think what the good thing about what I'm hearing now is that people aren't like, no way do I want you to move forward with that. That is awful. So as long as not hearing that firm, decision from everyone on here, we'll continue to look at this stuff. It's good to know that you're open-minded about the opportunities that we have, and that we can continue to see how.
Yeah, I mean, we happen to not have the property owners or anything that might be the ones to say that, but I think they're creative solutions, and yeah, we can't realign that intersection like we talked about. There's a few more questions that popped up. The square improvements were improved years ago since it's a bit hazardous. Is that now pending again? No, those are definitely happening. It's just a matter of time, right? Or money.
Yes. Yeah, no, the money's done. We're just working through the design and design approvals with VDOT right now. Like I said, I can't remember. We can find that information for a schedule for that, but I think they do still expect that to get under construction in 2021.
We do have one attendee who does not like either option, just so you know, for Crozet Avenue. Let's see if anybody is seeing ones that I should pull forward that I might have not. Let me know. Sandy?
Yeah, I was thinking about the massive inconvenience of trying to build a roundabout on Crozet Avenue. Wouldn't you have to close the road for a significant amount of time? Whereas if you did the quadrant, you could sort of let one lane of traffic through on each side, or use.
Yeah, there would obviously be construction delays with any improvement. I don't think we would have to close it all. You can put a roundabout onto a road without having to shut it down entirely. You may have to do one laning for a period of time, but as we saw with the Rio 29 interchange, you can do
anything. Yeah, all I would say is please don't do that to us. I drive that road probably several times a month, and I still find it massively confusing. So let's
the grade separated. We're not putting forward any grade separation in
Okay.
I think we got a good 25 years before that'll be necessary.
Does VDOT already have right of way through that church parking lot?
No, they do not. They have there's a little bit of right of way, I think, right as you approach Crozet Avenue, but no, the right of way would be a difficult issue to work through on both of these. But
yeah. Another attendee says railroad crossing should be the #1 priority to connect the north and south downtown businesses. I feel like we got that a fair amount in the Barnes Lumber discussions. People are pretty concerned with being able to get people from Barnes Lumber to, to the Crozet Pizza area.
I know the developer is interested in looking at that, and we'll continue to evaluate it. I think it's a valuable solution. I know we're running short on time. I don't know if Rachel or Tori had anything else they wanted to add before we got off, but if there are other questions or comments, they can be forwarded to me either through Rachel, or you're welcome to reach out, and I'd be happy to answer them.
I said this in the Q&A, but in case everyone didn't see it, we'll post this presentation online tomorrow on the calendar page for this event, and I put the link in the Q&A. But I'd be also happy to just email it around if you'd like to see it.
Yeah, it's super helpful if you guys get the recording posted and the slides. If you send that to me in an email, I can send it out to the list, and that helps a lot. I usually get a lot of people asking me later for the links, so it helps if I just can send it all out.
Sure, we'll do that.
Thanks. Tom, I see a question, and there's a go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, before we go, can I ask staff a question? When will we be getting the updated land use matrix based on last meeting that we had in the votes?
So we have not had we have not had time to go back and digest all of the feedback we've heard and look at that because we've been preparing for this meeting. But after we get tonight, we're going to, as staff, going to get together and start to pull together content to get ready for a planning commission work session. And we tentatively have that scheduled for January 12th. I will share out materials for that as soon as they're available. Allie and I coordinated on this earlier, and I think the plan would be for me to share those with Allie and she can email. I know she has
So you will have that data included by the time you go to the planning commission.
Yeah, I asked, Rachel and I spoke and she said she would send me the materials that they're gonna take to planning commission ahead of that, that I can share with all of the committee. Is that right, Rachel?
That's correct.
So sometime before that tentative date of January 12th, we'll see.
It will be more than, it would probably be at least 10 days in advance of that because we have to post them online for the planning commission and a week in advance. So it will be enough time for you to read and digest and be prepared to come out to that meeting if you're interested. It won't be a public hearing, it's a work session, but the planning commission does typically allow public comment at those work sessions.
Thanks. All right, let's see. There's one more question here. When Library Avenue was discussed and put in, there was talk about a street across from it that connects to Carter to relieve the traffic having to turn left on Crozet Avenue, right onto Darman's Gap. Sorry, another question for Kevin. Do you know any?
Yeah, that is really the basis for these like quadrant intersections, and the big circle was the idea that there had been a proposal to extend Library Avenue all the way to Carter to turn that into a four-way. So that's sort of building off that idea.
So it could sort of be more of a big square maybe than a big circle.
Yeah, it could. Mm-hmm.
Allie's very anti-circle.
I am not at all. I'm just paraphrasing.
No circles, corners only.
I didn't say that at all. I said I like the big circle. I am a big runner, so I am a pedestrian on these intersections many, many times a week. So I feel like I have a good sense of how friendly or not these concepts might be to walkers, especially right there. But I'm into all these. I do think like some of this discussion is more like we're thinking of how things are now, and really these projects are 25 years from now when we're talking about the roundabout at Library Avenue. So, but
I'm with Ally. I think we go with the circle because it has in it a light at Charming Gap, and we can put that light in now in waiting for the project to go forward. It'll help solve some of the problem.
yeah, I mean, yeah, could the big circle be phased?
I imagine it probably could. Something we can look into.
Yeah, because maybe that would be part of it too, that it's more of a traffic light, and then the connection to Carter is straight, and then eventually it gets improved to be more of a circle to speed things up.
Yeah, we don't have to make it turn the one-way sections one way in the first phase. We could just keep them all two-way, but direct left turns to the Library Avenue intersection. That's a possibility we can look at.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all for me. If there's no other hand raises, we can say goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me and for the interaction. Like I said, you're welcome to reach out anytime.
Thanks, Kevin. It's always exciting to hear from you. All right. Our next meeting, I don't know when it's scheduled for. Rachel, help me out.
January 13th.
Thank you. That's correct.
Reading my script from last time. So, all right, January 13th. Well, that will be exciting if you guys make it to Planning Commission the night before. All right. So our next meeting is scheduled for January 13th at 7 p.m. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting will be posted at a later date in accordance with Emergency Ordinance number 20-A14 and open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Kevin.